Hey guys, I hope you're well. Today we are gonna have a look. Hey guys, I hope you're well. Today we are going to have a look at my sampling modular case. I recently made a similar video about my analog case, which has some similar modules as this one. So if you haven't, please check that one out first, because I won't go too much into detail over the modules that I already explained why I have them and so on. But yeah, let's have a look at this. The purpose, as the name implies, of this case is to sample, record whatever buffer audio and play it back in interesting ways, either completely unsynced and looping, or also triggered in the right moment and everything in between. It is for me kind of a way to create soundscapes, interesting textures, things in the background, but I can even use it to create full tracks, given that I have some sort of instrument next to it, because you might have already thought of that the case doesn't really make any sound by itself, so some sort of input. Here today it's the OP1 is required to make this whole everything work. So let's have a look at the individual modules. The first one is this tiny line amp here, which I use to increase line level signals to modular level. It's a very handy module, and one very nice feature about it is that it has two outputs per input, which means I can now send my OP1 into the main outputs, but if I wanted to sample it, I don't have to unplug this cable and plug it, for example, into the squid sample and then monitor through here, but I can still keep hearing what I'm doing, and if I want to sample it, I just plug in the second output into its input. This is very handy for me. I didn't really buy it for that purpose. I only realized afterwards that it was kind of a nice add-on, and yeah, you can of course also mold your outcoming signal, but this for me is it's just very, very handy. So next to it we have the three modules that actually hold the sounds and play the sounds in this case. The first one is the squid sample. In the original or an older version of this case, I had two morphogenes here, but maybe, I don't know, a year or 10 months ago, I exchanged one of them for the squid, and it since then has kind of become the heart of the whole system actually. I absolutely love that module, and probably for its simplicity and its sound. And what it is, it has many similarities to the Digitakt actually, minus the sequencer of course, but the reason I'm saying that it is also a mainly percussive or drum sampler at heart, but it's also very easy or fun to misuse it for everything else from melodic to textural sonic work. It is inspired by 90s Akai samplers, which means it doesn't have the sample rates or hi-fi audio quality you would expect from a modern sampler or interface for your computer, whatever. This one just has a sample bit rate of up to 16 bits and a sample rate of up to 44 kilohertz. So at this rate, at these settings, what you put in will more or less sound the same recorded into it, but it is of course not, the files are not as deep. If you want to pitch them up or down, you will, even at those settings, introduce some aliasing, and as soon as you start lowering these rates, you will get very fast into lo-fi territory, which in this module just sound very good. Especially the bit reduction which in theory is the same on all samplers, it still doesn't always sound the same. And on here, I think they just nailed that lovely crunch. It sounds start to become rather hairy and warm and also kind of dirty, but they are not sounding harsh or distracting in any way. So the sound alone for me makes this module worth it. But aside from that, it has 8 channels which can all be triggered. So you can have 8 separate things going on. The last 3 of those 8 channels are special channels because they can also be pitched up or down and played chromatically via volt per octave. So while the others can just be you can set the speed while 50 is the normal speed and 25 is half speed and so on, but you can't play them. In the last 3 you can, so you can use it in very different ways, and especially when you play sounds over a wider octave range, you get heavy aliasing in the higher frequencies, which is just sounds nice. I mean, if you do not like this kind of audio effect or degradation, this really is not the module for you. But if you have any heart for 90s sample-based music, this will sound very pleasing to you, I'm pretty sure. The module has 4 outputs plus 1 mix output, which means that always 2 pairs of the channels are combined into 1 output. 8 would have been way nicer, but 4 is still better than nothing. It also has 3 CV inputs, which doesn't sound like much, but it has a very complex CV matrix built in, so I can route each of these signals to each parameter. So it isn't for example, if I send an LFO into the first CV input, this one isn't limited to whatever parameter I set it to, but it can control various things on various tracks. It can control the filter on track 1 and the bitrate on track 3 and the volume on track 8 and so on. So you can really get a lot of out of these 3 inputs if you kind of get creative with it. And this is also, as I say in many of my videos, I just like the limitations of it. I like that the sample time is only 11 seconds. I like the lo-fi aesthetic, and I like that it makes you think of how you use it. You can also, of course, resample, not via menu, but by actually just routing the audio of one output back into the input. And it's just for me a fun sampler to use. It only has one encoder and some buttons, so it is in some ways menu heavy, and especially if you want to kind of set the sample start and end points precisely, so there will be kind of some like knob turning or encoder turning, and more than if it would have dedicated controls for each parameter. But yeah, I think it's still fine to use as is. So next to this one we have the Morphogene, and as I said, I used to have 2, which might give you an idea of how much I like this module. It's a music concrete or tape inspired workflow or philosophy, which means you record in stereo a larger chunk of audio and then splice it up into several pieces, and these can then be arranged via this parameter. They can layered and added to via the morph function. It also has some granular way of stretching the audio, and of course it can be pitched up and down. The granular stuff on this module is very different to something like clouds or ABBA, so it doesn't create these dense clouds of sound, because it does only play 3 grains at the same time, I think. While, I don't know, I think on clouds it's 16 or something like that. So you just get the more you stretch sound, the more sparse the audio will become, and it will be in some way a bit more stuttery than something you will expect from a pure granular module. But I like this effect, but also the Morphage Gene, I think, shines for everything that is following that tape-inspired workflow, and the granular I see more as a kind of way to make your sound, change your sound, kind of find interesting parts of it, but not to make these drony kind of dense layers of sound. When I say tape inspired, I just mean the concept. I don't mean the sound of it. It's very hi-fi actually. So it won't, whatever you record into it won't sound like it was recorded to tape. It's just that idea of cutting up tape and rearranging it and making a digital digital interpretation of that analog, really cutting with a scissor your tape workflow. I find it also very inspiring. You can use it in many different ways. You can use it as a looper, as a kind of thing that just holds a bunch of sound, and you explore that sound and try to find interesting sub rhythms, melodies, sections, drones within that sound. You can also use it as a pitch shifting delay. There are many ways to get creative with it, and it is entirely different to the squid, which makes it just an interesting combination. Not just it sounds different, but the whole idea of working with sound, while the squid is menu based. Here you don't have, you have some button combinations, but besides that everything is hands on, and you really just morph, as the name implies, your sound by hand. It's a very different approach, and equally fun to me. And the last module that holds sound can hold sound is clouds. In most, or in the classic rings into clouds kind of use, you will see clouds as an end of chain module, often not even modulated. It will then create some sort of chorusy layer of whatever you put in, and then it is also used a lot for its internal reverb, just to become an end of chain effect, and that's completely fine if you like to do that, but I don't find that very interesting for myself, so I don't use the reverb in it at all. It's completely dry 100% of the time. I'm not interested in that, and I also don't use it at the end, but for me it's just a different voice. Either I use it as an effect that shifts whatever is coming in from dedicated from just one or two sounds, or I use the buffer, which means that it freezes whatever audio is in here, and mainly more or less use it as an oscillator, often not changed or played via volt per octave, but just to hold something and then just bring that in and out whenever I need it. But it is part of the other sounds, and not something that is right at the end to kind of mush everything together. And with these three modules I have here 8 mono tracks. Here I have 1 stereo track, and here also 1 stereo, but of course I can record different things into mono, into left and right if I wanted to. I have to do that at the same time, but still it's possible. So I have between 10 and 12 different sounds going on, which is more than enough. Of course I can still play on top of that, but depending on how I set everything and how I trigger, loop everything that I can hold in here is enough to create a full track easily. It's just a matter of what I feel in the moment and what I think the track needs. So that is the sound section. On the top left there is the modulation section, which starts with the slop modular entropy. It is a noise module that also has a sample and hold part and a random CV output. I mainly just wanted to have a various noise sources in 3 HP, so it still fits that case. So this is the main reason I bought it, but the other functions are also nice to have, of course. It's analog, and I use the noise outputs often to modulate clouds, but sometimes I use them also just to bring in some white noise like a wave within my music, or I don't know, make kind of a high, not really, but a hi-hat-ish sounds if I want to create a rhythm. You can also hear that on floors, I think. Yeah, but it's not just a module for modulation, but also as a sound source. It is a sound source. Yeah, I bought it mainly for the size, but it's actually super complex, or it has many functions for that small size. So I'm pretty happy with that module. Next to it, we have Pamela's new workout. I explained that quite a bit in the other video. One of my favorite modules of all time. On here, it is used for all clocking, obviously, but also for all kind of non-envelope modulation. So everything in terms of random or LFOs, it's all handled by Pam, and it has a similar workflow or way of menu structure as the Squid. So once you understand one, you kind of understand both, and it's very easy for me to switch back and forth between the both modules when I'm editing or something, because it's kind of the same philosophy, and yeah, it's just a wonderful module to have. And it, as this whole case doesn't really have, or not really, it doesn't have a sequencer. The clocking, depending on how I set it, can also be used to precisely trigger samples in the Squid. So it kind of is the workaround, if you will, for that. Next to it, Ornament and Crime mini version. As in the other case, I mainly use it in the LFO mode in the envelope mode, sorry. So it has 4 envelopes that I can trigger or loop or play in Euclidean ways to fade in and out sounds, or influence other parameters however I want them. They can also loop, so it can become an LFO2. Sometimes, but not very often, I feel a track doesn't need envelopes, so I can set the module into the quad LFO app, and even just have more LFOs to organically bring in and out sounds. But in 95% of the times, it's just in this Picket mode, which is why I bought it for, and I just love it for that. Again, another favorite of mine. I have 2 in the other case, and here one, the Optomix from Make Noise, a low pass gate with built-in high pass filter per channel. It has 2 channels. It is one of my favorite modules too. I use it all the time. In here, not always just as a gate or VCA, but sometimes I just run something through it to use the high pass filter if I want to thin out 1 or 2 sounds for some reason. Yeah. Next to it is the Circuit Abbey Twiggy, which is a ring modulator, but all ring modulators can also be used as a VCA, and this is why I have it here. It's just a dual VCA, 1 sound coming in, 1 CV source coming in, and the output. I use it for if I want simple fades for some sounds, and that is basically all it does, but it's super tiny, so yeah, it's always nice to have more VCAs, as you know. Then there's a small mixer section. It's the Telexen, which is a 2 HP version of Nearness, the panning mixer, and the IntelliGel Unity mixer, also in 2 HP. So the first one is used for panorama mixing, which means depending on where I plug something in, I will hear the sound in the panorama. So on top it will be almost hard panned left, on the right it will be on the bottom it will be almost hard panned right, and in the middle it will be centered, and the rest is in between. So especially in combination with the squid, which has 4 outputs, it makes it very easy to create an interesting stereo panorama by just plugging in the individual outputs into here. I do not need volume control on that mixer because the squid has volume control over the individual channels anyways. So it is just a small and simple helper to create stereo sounds. And the Unity mixer is just here to combine 3 stereo sources. One of them is always the Telexen and the other 2 depend. So in this case I have the OP1 plugged in, but I could, for example, also unplug it and add both clouds and morphogene in stereo. But maybe if I, for example, record 2 different sounds into both sides of the morphogene, maybe I don't need it as a stereo module, so I could plug it into some of these panning inputs, and then I could keep the whatever sound source I have active in here and play on top. It really depends, but it's kind of the tiniest mixer option that I found, these 2 together, to sum up basically all signals of this case, which are a lot. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, plus maybe 2 from an additional source. So a very very useful pair of modules. And next to it is the Make Noise Q-Pass filter, which I in this case always use as a master filter actually. The reason for that is the Q-Pass sounds really nice, but it doesn't really sound like a normal filter. It would not be my go-to module if I would, for example, send a saw wave into it and to shape some sort of brass or string sound or lead bass sound, whatever. It's rather bubbly and acidy if you increase the resonance, but I keep most of the parameters rather down, and it just works very nicely for stereo sources, for complex stuff. It in that way it works kind of like the filters you would have in old samplers. That are meant to like shape sound in the way like a regular synthesizer does, but to kind of influence frequencies or tame sounds over the whole frequency range. And for that I use it all the time. It has 4 stereo outputs, low pass, band pass, high pass, and smile pass. For this purpose I more or less only use the low pass, or mostly even the smile pass, which, as the name implies, draws a little smiley curve on your signal depending on where the frequency is set. So kind of it dips the middle, and I then can add some resonance there, and it is I hoped when I bought it that it would do this, but it still surprised me how well it sounds for that purpose. It is just a wonderful module to kind of gel all the sounds together. I use it as you would use a compressor or saturation device, or the tape on which I record actually. So just something that blends the sounds together, and it works wonderfully that way. It has both stereo sides are controlled via one frequency knob, but it has still modulation for each side. So while you turn this or let it rest in one place, still both sides can shift individually. Even you can make one side go completely crazy and the other not move at all. It just depends on how you like it. But Again, it's not just the gluing of the sound sonically, but to give the overall sound a bit of movement, which I find very helpful for samples, because even if I modulate the samples and kind of yeah, try to breathe as much life into them as I can, it's still, a sample is always different than an analog sound source, for example. So this the way of having both sides just meander differently together with maybe a soft modulation of the main frequency will create a lot of movement in a sound that might be stale otherwise. So yeah, it's a really cool module for that stuff, and I always use it like that. These cables go then straight to my mixer and from there to the tape recorder. So it's really my output module, if you will. Nothing else comes after it aside from my transformer based output modules like the RIP or the Please Exist 2, which I explained in a different video, but these they don't have any modulation. It's just a passive module to go back to line level, and it also sounds good, but this is kind of the main sonic glue of the entire case. And yeah, so these are the modules. There are several bigger ones, so it is not as densely configured as my analog case, which makes the use of this one kind of simpler. As I said, it has kind of menus, especially here, where I have to kind of really focus and dial my stuff in if I want to have it, if I want it to sit right. But the reduced kind of layout, in some ways, I mean, still dense, but it could have more smaller modules. The reduced layout still makes it easier for me to concentrate on these rather complex settings that often need some attention to really make things work. And when I make music now, which I actually recorded previous to that because I messed up the introduction, I have to do it again, so I know what a track will sound like. But and don't be irritated if there's like a small shift in the camera angle or something. But yeah, this stuff needs a lot of attention to get right, but it is very fast to get started, which is the most important part for me, and I find it very easy to just jump in, have some sounds looping, and just kind of figure out where I want to go with it, how the overall sound is, and find inspiration. In many ways, it works as I would use something like the Coco Quantas, for example, just way more complex. And if I want maybe more hi-fi, and it's like a Coco Quantas that could make whole tracks in a way for me. And I'm very happy with this case. I haven't changed the module here in a whole while, and for example, ALM keep updating the squid, so it constantly, every couple of months, it gets new features. So it's still this case, even though I don't add anything. From time to time, it kind of becomes a new case, or parts of it become new or enhanced. So yeah, it's just fun to explore for me, and I will say let's make some music. So today we will use the OP1 as the only sound source here. I figured it's a nice, simple enough source so we can concentrate on the actual system, and I just have a couple of samples loaded into each of the 8 engines, and we will play them, and I just will kind of maybe change the envelope to make the sounds fit whatever I need to do. So let's start. So first, as I said, I will still monitor through the main output. I will then use the second output of the line amp to send audio into the squid sample. And yeah, we will see what we can come up with. Maybe to begin, just some kind of ambient bed, as I so often like to do. Maybe like this. I will check the levels. By the way, the clicking you can hear is from the not so well placed sample points within the OP1. Maybe use a different one. By the way, if you record something from the OP1, always unplug the USB. I just loaded it a bit, but sometimes it can create some sort of noise. If you have it, you probably notice it, but it's always better to just operate it from the battery if you record something. So let's go. So you can hear something. I will plug in the sound on the left channel, slightly left channel of the Telexen. Leave the recording. A nice thing about the squid is that it can just loop regularly, but it can also loop back and forth. So you can now hear that sound recorded. I will reduce the sample rate and the bits and slow it down to half speed and raise the level. So we have that. Since the output is shared from the first two channels anyways, I can add another thing onto it, onto the second channel, because they will more or less be in the same, not more or less, they will be precisely in the same position anyway, and I can't, if I kind of run this sound through something else, the second one will also be affected, so it makes sense to use the pairs for kind of similar purposes, I guess. Do the same thing. Okay, so this one is now playing on the left side. I think it would be best to do a similar thing on the right side as well. You also may have noticed that I recorded all of these a bit like 1 octave higher on purpose, so I can slow them down and they will still sound nice. One of these is too loud. This one, I think. Okay, so we have now 4. Oh wait, I forgot to loop the 4th channel. We have now 4 kind of looping things going on, and it already sounds rather complex. Just to give you an idea, this is the part that takes a bit longer and is a bit more menu heavy, but I will now set up 2 slow LFOs on the first 2 channels of the PEM's new workout. So one is a kind of tilted triangle wave and the other will be a sine wave, also a bit tilted. And I will mold these so I can use them for several things. And one of each will go into the CV inputs of the squid. And now I can route these 2 to several values within the module, and for example the volume. So what I will do is I simply will have that CV source decrease the volume of the first channel a bit, and the same for the third. Just so it will lower and raise it a bit so it creates more movement. Then on the 4th channel I will use the other input and the same on the 2nd. And now I will offset this value. So I set a volume level of 30 and a modulation of -6, so it goes between 30 and 24 points. Yeah, just like it goes up to 11, it's the same thing. So again, same for the other channels. So it is a bit fiddly, but overall I personally don't mind it, because if the module had like controls for all of this stuff, it would be like huge, and I think it's still the best solution they can have in this like limited control scheme. Okay, so you can now hear the sounds more fading in, and they are not fading in and out, but they are lowered and raised in volume and serve as our kind of bed to create something on top. Maybe we should try a melody. As in other videos, it's really hard for me to find a really good melody in such short time. I usually need a couple tries, so please forgive me if this won't be the best thing you ever heard. Okay, so I recorded this loop. We need to hear it, of course. So this one I will place in the middle. I can, of course, change the start and end points of these samples. I think it's okay for now. But if I would loop it, it would just get boring super fast, so I will trigger it occasionally. At the moment the trigger is coming in rather often, as you can hear, but maybe I won't we'll keep the loop longer, so it will now come in from time to time. I will make this one extra crunchy, and I will also use the filter which is built in, just to kind of shape off a bit of the noise. Maybe it would even work in half speed as everything. We will see. Okay, so this is kind of running now. Maybe we should use the morphogene now. I will plug in both channels. The signal the OP1 sends is just mono, but so still I have them on both. I have the audio on both channels of the morphogene in case I want to pan them differently. I think that sounds rather nice. I will make that sound a bit louder, but the overall sound a bit lower. Maybe trigger it more often. Okay, morphogene, I tend to clock it, so in case I need the clock also again, I will mode that too. So I just set the speed to normal. This makes it easier to cut the audio later on. Okay, so I will cut it up now. Normally I would record something longer, but I don't want to like keep just cutting up sounds now. Okay, so pitching this up, adding a bit of granular, stretching the sound in other words. And I will add some random modulation to the splices, the organization of the splices, so it steps through these. I just have 4, but still I will also add some random modulation to the morph parameter, which means that the amount the individual slices are layered changes randomly. So sometimes it will layer 2 of them roughly, and sometimes it will even add stuff to them. Yeah, and since this is kind of, it's not very loud, but even though it can still be a bit like annoying or too much, I think. I will bring the whole morphogene sound in and out via an envelope, and therefore I also use my clock, which is this one, and send it to the first channel of the ornament in crime. But set that to Euclidean. So, for example, now every 29 steps the envelope is triggered and creates starts, and with that fades in the morphogene. Make the envelope a bit longer. So we got that playing along as well. How about clouds? As I said, there are various ways to use clouds. This is one of them. I will just freeze the buffer. I set the module to stereo in lo-fi mode, which I think gives 4 seconds of sample time. Yeah. I will just record a chord, freeze it, and now I will unplug the OP1 for a second, or maybe longer, we'll see, and so we can listen to clouds. So it creates this kind of thick mess that it does, and therefore I need some modulation to make it more interesting. I mult the white noise, then send it to an attenuator, and from there to clouds. Do it another time, second time. So I have it's the same white noise, but I have individual control over the attenuation. Also do that with the pink noise. And finally, since this is also a bit much all the time, I will do a similar thing as with the morphogene. I will use the mix knob, because at the moment there's nothing coming in, so if I dial down the mix, the module will simply be, muted, and if I now send an envelope to it, it will fade in the sound. And I will also use the same clocking signal on this channel of the PKIT, also setting it to Euclidean, 31 steps. Lower the volume a bit, like not the volume, but the amount of CV sent, attenuate it in other words. So from time to time morphogene will fade in, from time to time clouds will fade in. Okay, so this is all playing along somewhat nicely. Dial down the morphogene a bit, and what we can do now is, for example, also use the white noise, send it to an optomix. Change the panorama a bit, make these wider, use this one here. So I high pass filter the sound quite a bit. Then send another envelope. These are too thick. Send another envelope in here. Again, Euclidean. I could send in several clocks, so the Euclidean measurements are different, but this just imagine me doing that. I don't want to get too much into all these menus at this point, but in general I would make things a bit more complex as I am doing it now. So from time to time a kind of noise wave will also be in our mix. Yeah, and that's essentially how I work with such a case. What I haven't done yet is create some modulation in the Q pass. So I use my LFOs that I set up earlier to give some movement to each side. Just make sure I have the right one. And of course, I know you were all waiting for it, some noise modulation on the filter. Just very, very softly. And I still have the three melodic and in some ways more powerful channels of the Squid sample free. I could, for example, record a drone and send in record a drone in like middle C, and then I could send a quantized signal from the PEMS workout into here, so it would play and pitch that sound up and down in the scale which I have going now. I could also just do the same thing over and over again with the other three channels. I could also resample part of the channels back into the module, or layer sounds on top of each other via the morphogene. So there's really a lot of stuff that can be done. As always, there are quite some cables going on now, but it's not nearly as close as with the modular case. So even though it looks complex, I still find it kind of a rather comprehensible way to use the modular, and especially since the modules are so complex. Yeah, and I think maybe this would sound better in original pitch. But yeah, I think it's just a fun way to work with sound, create ideas, and just kind of take them further. And if you pair something like this with something that is playable as the OP1, I could still just keep that running and play something live on top, or add some sequencer based thing like the Digitone or Analog 4, where then this case creates some kind of the more random wavy sounds, and the Analog 4 would be used for the more melodic structured parts. Yeah, there are many ways to use something like that, but you can still just make a whole track with just this and nothing else added besides maybe like reverb and delay effects on the outboard side. Yeah, and I find it super inspiring to use, and besides that I think it just sounds good, especially the Squid with lower sample rates through the Q pass, which makes kind of the majority of the sounds. It creates just a very nice kind of patina that I find easy to play or improvise over, since it sounds kind of warm and rich, but at the same time it's kind of restricted in the frequency range, and I don't have to kind of play against it. I can easily play on top of it, if that makes sense. So yeah, this is my sampling case. I hope you found that video helpful, as always. And also, of course, thank you for your support. Yeah, see you next time. Bye.